Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon, and I am your host. Today, we're going to be talking about the early education of a chocolate critic, and by that chocolate critic, I mean me. We're going to talk about what is it, right, that led me to becoming a professional chocolate critic. Now, right, as I point out in the introduction or the post for today's episode, it is probably the third most asked question I get. Number one recently has been about heavy metals. Number two is going to be what about white chocolate? And the third one is how did you decide to become a professional chocolate critic? Before we get there, I'd like to remind everybody that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of The Chocolate Life. Here's the homepage of The Chocolate Life right now. You can go there. You can click on the green button, which says join, and become a member. There's always been a free membership tier since 2008. But if you do have the resources to support the work that I do, the financial resources to support the work that I do, there are premium tiers that you can join. And some of those tiers include coaching and consulting hours and start at as little as $5 a month. So just wanted to let you know that I'm not doing network advertising. I don't have a Patreon. Everything is done through the memberships of The Chocolate Life. I also want to remind everybody that no matter where you are connecting from today, where in the world you're connecting from today, you can go into the live chat on YouTube or into the comments in LinkedIn or Facebook and give me a quick shout out. You can let me know where in the world you're connecting from. I'll get that shout out up on screen, and you can also ask questions or make comments, and I'll get those and I'll respond to them during the course of the episode. I also create a post for every single episode of Pod Save Chocolate, and this is the post here. And it's primarily a run of show. None of these episodes are scripted per se, but this is the points that I'm going to be covering over the course of the episode. And so you can go there, you can follow along. Today, I'm not going to be spending quite as much time going through the episode as going through the post as I normally do, but I'm going to leave it up here to follow along. So with all that out of the way, I do want to point out again that this question of how, Clay, did you become a professional chocolate critic? How did that happen? You know, what led up to it? And I think there are two aspects to answering that story, right? One of which is the actual circumstance of this. You know, how did this happen? The actual circumstance. And that was around the fact that I was in the south of France in 1994 on a business trip. And you never know when a very, very small decision is going to have a huge impact on your life. And so in this particular case, I was at a conference. It was called MILIA, M-I-L-I-A. The MI stands for Marché International. So this is an international market for multimedia properties. I was a consultant to the organizers of this event called MIDEM, M-I-D-E-M. They're now part of READ, which is one of the largest exhibition groups in the countries. And I got there because of my connection with a previous employer, a company called Rebo Studio, which was the first high-definition television production company in North America. When people at MIDEM reached out to the people at Rebo because they had participated in other markets, so MIP, MIPCOM, MIPIM, and film, these are all markets associated with selling film rights and video rights. When MIDEMs approached my boss and said, we're doing an international multimedia market. Hey, do you know anything about multimedia? And they said, Barry Rebo, the founder of the company, said, well, no, I don't know anything about international multimedia, but I have this, or interactive multimedia, but I have this guy who works for me who does. And that's how I found myself in the south of France in February of 1994 at this event, which was at the Palais des Festivals, which is the same place where the Cannes Film Festival is held. With this market on interactive multimedia. And I found myself the morning that I was about to leave with two options. Number one, I could go to the airport early and I could take all of my francs. So this was before the euro. And I could take all of my francs and I could go spend all of my money in duty free. Or what I could do is I could take a quick walk around Cannes, and do some sightseeing before my car came to take me to the airport. And I decided that what I would do is I would go sightseeing. And that morning, I remember walking into a food store. I don't remember which store it was. I do remember I could probably find the road that it was on, even though I haven't been in Cannes since 1998. I found myself in a food store, and I was confronted, I think is the best way to describe what happened. I'm confronted with a display of chocolate bars from French manufacturers. And one portion of the display attracted my attention. It was a series of 7 bars, and those 7 bars were all from a single manufacturer, which I now know is Maison Bona, and they were all identical white wrappers, and the only difference on the front of the wrappers appeared to be a place name. So some of them were pretty obvious. Equateur, given my knowledge of French, was probably Equator. Trinité was probably Trinidad. Cote d'Ivoire would have been Ivory Coast. And I ended up buying all 7 of those bars and bringing them back to New York City. And several weeks later, I had a dinner party in my home, and I brought out the bars. It may not have been several weeks later, but after I returned, I brought out the bars, and I had a chocolate tasting for dessert. My first ever chocolate tasting, late February, early March 1994, and I had no idea what I was doing. I just ripped open the labels, tore off the name of the country, put it on the plate, passed it all around. And my only real memory of that evening was that we all had a different favorite chocolate for a different reason. And so this is sitting in the back of my mind. And shortly thereafter, I found myself in a bookstore on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And I was standing in front of the magazine rack, and I was looking at, Chocolatier magazine and Wine Spectator and Architectural Digest and a bunch of other magazines. And I realized, this is the little mouth on the little boy who's in the photo. Oh my gosh, there's no such thing as professional chocolate critics. There were hobbyists who wrote about chocolate and did ratings and reviewings. There were people who were employed by companies as tasters, right? But there was no such thing as an independent professional chocolate critic. And I had an epiphany in that store, a Barnes & Noble, that day, which was, oh my gosh, I could become the world's first professional chocolate critic. I could become the Robert Parker of chocolate. And that's the way I remember thinking about it to myself. I could become the Robert Parker of chocolate. Now, I had no idea at the time what it meant to be a chocolate critic, why Robert Parker was a name that I knew from wine magazines. I had no idea, but I just had this sense that, okay, there's a market opportunity here. I also had a sense that this is not something that's going to happen next week or next month, that it's going to take a while for the people who had been educating themselves about wine and spirits and beer and cheese and other gourmet foods to turn their attention to chocolate. So I realized I had some time to educate myself, even though I didn't know at the time what I needed to learn, who I could learn it from, where I needed to go to learn it. There's all this stuff that was, just no idea how to proceed. But I realized, oh my gosh, I have a market opportunity. There is this road I can take, right, which might lead me to an interesting place. I could make a career writing about chocolate. And the real question is, how did I get to that point? So what were the circumstances of my life that enabled me to say, oh my gosh, there is an opportunity here, and how can I go and take advantage of that opportunity? And this is where I'm going to spend the rest of the conversation this morning. And why is it important now? You may ask, why am I doing many of the episodes of Pod Save Chocolate that I'm doing? And it's because I'm using this as a chance to talk through things. I'm generating a transcript. I can clean up that transcript, and I can use it as input for other writing and other reports. So, for example, last Friday's episode on heavy metals and cocoa and heavy metals, cadmium, lead, for example, and Consumer Reports, right, is input for, right, a written report on this. And by doing the research and talking you through it, I'm generating background on that. And this is what I'm doing. I have been working on a sort of autobiography, right? And it may be the title of The Early Education of a Chocolate Critic. That might be one of it, but it's going to be a combination of my background and my photography because I'm trained as a photographer. Just a quick um, shout out from Jin Kim in California. Jin says, when Clay hands out chocolate for Halloween, are the ghouls and ghosts getting Hershey's or Cluzel in their basket? Well, interesting question, Jen. And I'm going to be talking about that in depth, the history of chocolate and Halloween and gifting and all that kind of stuff this coming Friday on Friday's episode of Pod Save Chocolate. I haven't really handed out chocolate at Halloween since 2010, right? In part just because that's when I got separated from my family and I moved into some place, and it was in an apartment building, and there were no people in my apartment trick or treating. And then I went from that apartment building in Westchester County to an apartment during COVID, and wasn't a whole lot of trick or treating during COVID. And I'm now here in Arizona, and believe it or not, there's not a whole lot of trick or treating in the part of town that I live in. So I really haven't had to think about trick or treating in terms of what I'm going to buy and give to people. And since 2010, just number one. Um, but before then, I wasn't really thinking about the issues related to sustainability and child labor and those sorts of things, which would cause me to hand out expensive chocolate to kids. I wasn't trying to make a point to children. I felt that using Halloween as an opportunity to make a social point to young children wasn't necessarily the best use of my time or the best use of that chocolate, right? So if somebody had, and the chocolate might not necessarily have been in a form which would be amenable to children. So if I had a 5-gram Neapolitan, for example, so if I was doing a generic milk Cuisel milk chocolate, which was wrapped in a 5-gram square, I could do that. If I was, same thing, Scharfenberger had Neapolitans, 5-gram squares, could I use those? The answer is absolutely yes. And maybe the children would go and trade them away to older family members. Maybe the children would give them to parents, but there was no easy and obvious way to be able to figure out how am I going to go take advantage of those things. So I deferred to what my children wanted. Um, so if they wanted to get, this and that and the other, pick a brand, pick a particular chocolate. If that's what they wanted in their bags at the end of the evening, that's what I got. So I didn't worry about any of those issues, right? Um, right. And I don't even know that today that what I would do is I would try to make a political point to parents through young children. I would want to find some other way to go about doing that. But thanks for the question. It's a good one. And I will be talking about the history of Halloween from its origins as the pagan festival Samhain, and then start looking at how gifting and then moving into chocolate and when did candy become a part of the American tradition of gifting um, of candy and chocolate and trick or treating in general. How did it become a part of society? So, Jen, good answer. Thank you very much. Kids get Mr. Good bars. I keep the Om Nom. Yeah, I mean, I think that what you could do, what I would do is I'm trying to impress. Now that, assuming that I had children in the house, right? What I would be doing is I would be trying to have this regular conversation with my children about, the differences in chocolate. And I do know at least that my youngest, which is my biological daughter, I have 3 older stepdaughters. We've had this conversation, and she understands the difference and why it's okay to spend a lot of money on a bar of chocolate as opposed to focusing on less expensive alternatives, which might be socially and environmentally less sustainable. But I do have what I think of as secret chocolate obsessions, and I'll be talking about what my secret chocolate obsessions are in this Friday's episodes and give you that context for those things. But I need to remind myself to talk about secret chocolate obsessions. But with all that, let's go back and back to early childhood. So as I mentioned in the post for today's episode, my father was in the computer industry since the 1950s. And from the time that I recall, most of his connection was through academic computing. He was the head of the academic computing facility at the University of California at Irvine in the mid-1960s. The family moved to New Zealand in the mid-1970s, where my father was head at Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand, ran the academic computing facility there. I learned through this time that he was at Stanford University in the late 1950s. As a kid, I remember my first memories as a child were in Stanford Village in Palo Alto, when my father was at Stanford. I don't remember anything about ever going and visiting the computing facility there, but I do know that there was connection at Stanford University to computing in my earliest days. And in particular, and I learned this much later, that one of my father's colleagues while he was at Stanford was a gentleman by the name of, and it's going to completely disappear, Doug Engelbart. And Doug was, among other things, the inventor of the computer mouse, right? And he was also, while he was working at Stanford in the late 1950s, working on an ARPA, so this is the predecessor to DARPA, an ARPA project to create an information management system based upon the work of a presidential science advisor by the name of Vannevar Bush in an article published in the late 1930s called As We May Think. So, I have a copy of the initial research paper that Doug produced on his system called Augment. Now, a lot of what it is that I'm going to talk about today is connections, right? And I think that I have been incredibly fortunate in the kinds of connections that I've been able to make in my life and my career. And it may be that the connections and the through line are a large part of what provided me with right? I have a fine arts degree. I've spent 4 years and a lot of money pursuing a fine arts degree, but within weeks, within a couple of months of graduating from the Rhode Island School of Design, I decided to say, I'm going to go work for a high-tech computer graphics startup. And then after a decade of working in high-tech computer graphics, interactive multimedia, high-definition television production, right, information technology, and information management systems, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a career change and go, oh my gosh, chocolate. Right? So I want to get back to that because I think that that's important, an important part of my story and what it is that I want to impress upon the readers of this, right? Because there's a reason why I call this the Chocolate Life, right? So the Chocolate Life, the name is a pun. Right. So I was listening to the radio after dropping my kids off at school, and I had on the radio up came Ricky Martin's song "Living La Vida Loca." I like to play with language, and in my mind, "Living La Vida Loca" became "Living La Vida Coco." I went home and said, "Oh my gosh, I need to register that as a domain." And then a couple of weeks or a couple of months later, so this is in the 90s. At some point, I said, "Oh my gosh, what I have to do is I have to." Was it in the 90s? It could have been 2000s. It could have been around the time my book was released in 2007. The dates, I'll have to go and look at how long I've owned the domain. But I needed to say, I need an English language version of Living La Vida Loca and La Vida Coco. I needed an English language version of La Vida Coco, and I registered The Chocolate Life. And what The Chocolate Life for me is connecting with something you're truly passionate about, right? And then using it as a driver for making personal and professional progress in your life and hopefully finding a way to make a living at it. But that's not necessarily a component of it. It's not a requirement. And then the next part of it is to inspire others to find and follow their own chocolate life. And in that respect, it's very, very much akin to the Japanese concept of ikigai, which I learned much later. The concept of ikigai is, right, find something you're good at, Find something the world will benefit from. Find something that will support you, right? And it is my contribution to the concept of ikigai that what you do is you want to inspire others to find and follow their own chocolate life. And in some respects, as a child, this is what my father modeled to me, right? He got to a point where he was professionally unfulfilled. He wasn't having fun. He wasn't enjoying what it is that he was doing. And he would switch careers. Right now, he was always within computing, so there was this limit. But he was good at what it is that he did. He found great joy, he found great fulfillment, and he inspired a lot of other people. And along the way, oh my gosh, he met some interesting people. So Doug Engelbart, right, wrote the Augment project, and then out of that, my father developed an information management tool, originally on pencil and paper, and then through 3 separate iterations, he and I and other people brought that as a product to market. So there was this connection throughout my life with the work that my father was doing. I wanted to be an artist since as young as I can remember. I didn't want to be computing. When I went and visited my father at the computer center at UCI, I was much more interested in the dot matrix and line printer output that was images, right? More of that than I was in, you know, all of the other work that you could do on a timeshare mainframe computer at the time. And when I expressed interest in doing these things, my father would hand me a book on programming in Fortran or programming in COBOL. And I wasn't interested in that. I was interested in the pictures, and I didn't see the connection at the time. But one of the connections was that later on in life, I learned that Doug Engelbart was the inventor of the computer mouse. That happened, gosh, Palo Alto Research Center, like this is in the early mid 1970s. The work at Park on was it the Alto? Um, was work that Steve Jobs took when he was working on the first Apple computers, the Lisa before the Macintosh. And so this connection's there. I had the great good fortune of actually meeting with Doug in person on a trip to his office, which was at Logitech, I believe, at the time. Right. But there's this connection to Doug Engelbart. And another connection, which people may not know, is that sometime in the late 90s, early 2000s, British Telecom, BT, tried to patent the hyperlink. The concept of the hyperlink, British Telecom tried to patent. And Doug had been a part of something called the Mother of All Demos. And the Mother of All Demos, he demonstrated a version of Augment where the hyperlink was shown. And so my connection to Doug, right, was this connection to interactive multimedia and the hypertext and the World Wide Web and all the things that we're talking about today that allow me to do what it is that I am doing. Another connection that's all a part of this is in the mid-late 1960s. My father had a book on a shelf called Computer Lib Computer Dreams. And Computer Lib Computer Dreams was written by a guy by the name of Theodore Nelson. And Ted, I'm going to call him Ted because I've met him in person. Ted coined the phrases hypertext and hypermedia. Right? And my connection to Ted Nelson was in the late 1980s. I was working for a consultancy, Interconsult, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. They had a building on Harvard Square in the TAC building. That's where their offices were. They didn't have the building, they had their offices. And one of the people who worked there was Ted's partner. And Lauren was somebody I got to know well, and Ted would come and visit. And so I had a chance to connect my professional work in the late 1980s to this book that was on my father's bookshelf that I was aware of in the 1960s. And I believe I have my father's copy of that in my archive in storage. So there's this connection that is going on between my early childhood and, right, the late 1980s. Now, where else is this going? So out of RISD, so I have a BFA in photography from Rhode Island School of Design. I graduated with that BFA in 1983, and I moved to New York City immediately afterwards. But while I was at RISD during summers, and when I moved to New York City, I had a chance to, among other things, first assist for an architectural photographer by the name of Wolfgang Hoyt. And Wolfgang's mentor was a gentleman by the name of Ezra Stoller. And anybody who knows anything about architectural photography in the United States will know that Ezra Stoller is the dean of architectural photography in the United States. And I had the great good fortune of being able to work with Ezra on several occasions as the first assistant to Wolfgang, who was acting as Ezra's first assistant. Now, in a small world connection, again, what I want to point out is that I think that there's value in going through your life and going, who do I know? Who have I met? Where can I make the connections? Where can I pin the dots? And this is what I mean. I don't know that I am unique in this, right? It may be that I'm unique because I went to art school and I lived in New York City. That may be something that's unique. And if you didn't have that background, you might not have this set of experiences. But I remember working for Wolfgang and getting on the train at Grand Central and taking Metro North to Mamaroneck, New York, and then getting off the train and walking to Ezra's studio, Esto Studio in Mamaroneck. And then many, many years later, so that would have been, when would I have been doing that? 83, 84. So after I moved to Mamaroneck, so we're talking about maybe the mid 1990s. So well over a decade later, I am in Mamaroneck for the first time. And I look around me and I'm going, oh my gosh, this is awfully familiar. I have been here before. And it took a while for me to remember, because of the separation, that, oh, I've been here and this is why I was here. So after I met the woman who would become my wife, who lived in the town next door, Larchmont, and I'm in Mamaroneck for one reason or another, not entirely sure, I'm going, oh my gosh, here's a connection to here's a connection to a previous life, right? I know that I've been here because I visited as Ezra Stoller at Esto Studio, and I can walk and, oh my gosh, it's exactly where I remember where it is. I think there's value in sitting down, again, not all at once, but as a part of getting older, maybe, and looking back, that you look to make these connections and pick up the points at which you can see where there are these inflections, where can little decisions, little connections, where do they have a huge effect on your life? So that's why that's there. Um, and I am I'm incredibly fortunate to have those experiences. One of my professors at RISD, a gentleman by the name of Al Souza, big painter from Texas, introduced me to a gentleman by the name of Robert Friedis. Bob owned a gallery, Friedis, a gallery, later Friedis Ordover, in Soho. And I spent a summer not first assisting, but interning at one of the premier photography galleries in New York City, getting to know the work of Larry Clark and people like that. I mean, it's just great. And the value of that connection that summer was I realized I didn't want to become a fine art photographer, right? Because of the political climate of the fine art world at that time. So in the early 1980s, I was at openings, at receptions, all those things. So sometimes these connections, sometimes these introductions you're going to make are good, even though the outcome of them is negative compared with where you originally thought you were going. But it is, if I may come back, here's what my father had taught me. We're sitting in our house in Westminster, California in 1972. I had just about to finish my freshman semester at Westminster High School. And my father's reading a copy of Communications to the ACM, and he puts it down and looks over at my mother and says, "Hey, Elizabeth," my mother's name, "how'd you like to move to New Zealand?" And she says, "Great, when do we leave?" And this would have been early October 72. My father was in New Zealand over Halloween or Thanksgiving, over Thanksgiving. So, right. In 1972, he returned from that trip with a job in his hand, and we moved less than 3 months later to New Zealand, right? So this notion of, oh, here's what it is that I'm doing, and then bang, we're going to make a decision and our life is going to change, was really a part of all of that. So I had this modeled for me as a child. It was okay. It was okay to consider that you thought of your life as having a particular trajectory, and you could on the spur of a moment with small decision, just uproot and change. Now, moving to New Zealand as a 14-year-old and returning as an 18-year-old, there's all sorts of good and bad associated with that. So positive things, and then negative things as well. Negative things are all social relationships with people. But I did that. So I returned to the United States in the summer of 1976, and very shortly thereafter, I moved to Olympia, Washington, to attend the Evergreen State College. I had moved there intending only to spend my freshman year, and then would take a gap year in the process. And during that gap year, I would move to Portland, Oregon, and where I would attend Reed College, which is where both my parents had attended. Now, there, while I was at Evergreen, I had an amazing experience with a program called Images, which was taught by Marilyn Frasca, who's a painter, Mark Levinsky, who is a philosopher. And there I was introduced to my first real philosophy of associated with art making, which continues to this day. I mean, John Dewey's Artist Experience, I can recite the first line of the book by one of the ironic perversities that often attend the course of affairs. I mean, I'm, I first read that book in 1977. But connections again, right? So many people know the name Matt Groening. Matt is The Simpsons for all intents and purposes. I am sure that I met Matt while he and I were on the campus at the Evergreen State College. I don't recall, any particular meeting, and it may have just been we saw each other while we were both traversing the campus. But he was there in 1977 when I was there. And then, 1976, 1977, when I was there, he graduated at the end of my freshman year. But I was also, a person who was in my images class was a cartoonist by the name of Linda, with a Y, Linda Berry. So if people know the Ernie Pook comic strip series, Linda Berry was a classmate of mine. And just think about, right, the connections that you're going to make while you're there. Is really, really important. Right. So I moved to Portland after my freshman year and applied to Reed, was accepted at Reed, decided not to go because the Reed that my parents attended in the late 1940s was not the Reed of the 1970s. I had been introduced to the community radio scene while I was living in Olympia, Washington. I then had an introduction to a non-community FM radio station when I was a KBOO FM, when I was living in Portland. And I spent most of the 3 years, my gap years, working in non-commercial FM radio in Portland, Oregon. Really cool. It's a great time. Early 1980s, music scene was insane. I was young. I was in my mid 20s. Just had a wonderful time working there. It was a great time. No, it was in my late teens, early 20s. Now that I think about it. But what happened? I got to work with some amazing people and met some amazing musicians. I promoted concerts with groups like the LA4, Aerto and Flora Purim. I was, deep into the local Portland music scene. I even got an opportunity to write a letter to L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology, because there was a Church of Scientology in Portland. I was never interested in the religion, but I did get a chance to correspond with L. Ron Hubbard. I have that correspondence to this day. If anybody's interested in letters which are signed by L. Ron Hubbard, let me know. I'll find them and get them to you. But one of the highlights of that Scientology music scene connection in Portland was a concert with Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock. So they were just doing the two of them on stage, with 10-foot, 9-foot concert grands, Biesendorfers. I was backstage. I mean, it was just an amazing experience, right? But this was what Portland was to me, right? And so I am, I'm in Olympia, Washington. I'm moving to Portland to go to college. I decide that college is not what it is that I want to do. I'm going to spend 3 years in radio. And then while I am working in Portland, somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, Clay, I'm a graduate of RISD. This is not the conversation, but I'm looking at your portfolio of photographs and they would accept you." And so after 3 years, roughly, of working in radio in Portland, I just applied to RISD, was accepted, and made the decision to go. And bang, bang! All of a sudden, I'm across the country, and my life has changed again. Right. And so this is another example of having a decision in a moment where you have no idea what it's going to be in your life, but it ends up having huge impact going forward. Now, so after I graduate from RISD, I'm in New York City. I'm first assisting around for a bunch of people. Coincidentally, I'm working for a studio photographer who did all the black and white newspaper ad campaign work featuring Charlie Chaplin for the introduction of the IBM PC Junior. In addition to being a studio assistant, I'm the darkroom assistant. So the prints I made were used in the national advertising campaigns and black and white newspaper advertising campaigns for the IBM PC Junior, and I get approached by a RISD alumni connection who says, "Oh my gosh, there's this small fine arts computer graphics company, not fine arts, but a computer graphics company, and you know about computers and you know about art. So why do I know about computers? Because while I was at RISD, the last class I took during winter section was the first class on computing, and it was taught by professors who were graduate students at Brown University in their computer science department. And it happened that the head of the computer science department at that time was the guy by the name of Andy Van Dam, Andries Van Dam. I call him Andy, I've met him. And he was a author or co-author of the first interactive fundamentals of interactive computer graphics. So I had that connection. I saw my first high-end computer graphics workstation, Apollo DN 10,000 workstations. And it's that where I was able to go, oh my gosh, I can now connect computing with making pictures, making images, right? As a group, the class also made a field trip up to Cambridge, where we went to MIT and visited with Muriel Cooper's Visible Language Workshop, where I was further shown state of the art of computer graphics technology. For people who may not know, the VLW eventually got taken over by Nicholas Negroponte and became the Media Lab at MIT. So I had a chance to meet with, Muriel Cooper, Alice Capro, a bunch of people at that time, right, who were doing, cutting edge work, right, in computer graphics. And so I went to this company, Artronics. This is October of 1984, and all of a sudden, I am captivated. And within a month, I have a full-time job, and I start traveling around the United States, and I start traveling around the world, trying to make sense of computer graphics hardware and software that we make and how it compares with the rest of the world. And this is where the first real connection gets made between my background and where it is that I am today, because I spent 4 years working at Artronics thinking about the future. So I was writing articles for Computer Graphics Today or Computer Graphics Monthly, Millimeter Magazine, about the applications of computers towards filmmaking and trends in general. But as an employee of Artronics, one of the things that I was doing was taking a look at what our competitors were doing, taking a look at where the market was going, and saying, what do we need to do as a company to make our products competitive? What are we going to do to make things competitive? So I was thinking about stuff, not just this iteration, but the next iteration and next year and the year after and the year after that. So I was forward thinking, right? And is that forward thinking aspect compared with intuitive skills, which I developed while at Evergreen and at RISD, that when I saw chocolate, I went, bing, there's an opportunity here, right? So it was this forward-thinking work that I was doing. Now, in 1987, 88, Artronics got bought by Genographics. I had to move to some small town outside Syracuse, New York, if I wanted to keep my job. I said, no, I want to remain in Manhattan. And so I went consulting. And so I had just a really fabulous consulting opportunities in the late 1980s, early 1990s that led to, among other things, having an opportunity to go and attend TED 2. So people may know TED, Technology, Entertainment, and Design, and TEDx and things like that. But this is TED 2. It's in February of 1990. I'm in Monterey, California. And so I'm at TED 2. right? And who else was at TED 2? I'm going down here. So TED 2 was founded by a guy by the name of Ricky Saul Worman, Richard Saul Worman. Among other things, I knew Ricky. Again, I've met him. I knew Ricky from his work in New York City, and particularly a book that he wrote called Information Anxiety. And so from my early work in the New York new media scene, I was aware of Ricky and his work, and it connected to the work that I had done with my father and the groups bringing this information management system to market, which is called ENFISH, ENFISH, which is the first two letters of the three words enter, find, and share, which is what we thought people wanted to do with information. So I'm connecting with Ricky. If you haven't read Information Anxiety, it's a really interesting read, especially for the time, right? And so I know Ricky. I know some of his partners in TED, and I have a job which provides me with the resources to go and visit. One of my mentors from RISD, a professor by the name of Mihai Nadine, was somehow instrumental. I don't remember the details of it, and my becoming one of the limited number of people, 300, I think, were the people who were at TED 2. Right. So who else was at TED 2? Right. So, oh God, John Scully, right, from Apple Computer was there. I don't know. I don't know that I ever met John, right? We're talking about this. I have no idea what the rest of this is, but Pantone was one of the sponsors of the event, and everybody was given, walked into the auditorium one morning, and there's a T-shirt on their chair, and we're looking at a RGB or cyan, magenta, yellow, red, green, blue, yellow. We're looking at a spectrum of colors, and so everybody puts on a shirt and is taking this picture. I'm somewhere in the sort of red-ish section. Unfortunately, I don't think I have this T-shirt anymore, and you can't tell it, but this gentleman right here is named Mark Cantor. And you may not know the name Mark Cantor, but Mark was the founder of Macromind. So we're looking at Macromedia Director and things like that. This is the guy, right? And I know him from that. There are also people I know there while I'm there from Adobe Systems. So student friends, colleagues, fellow students of mine at RISD when I was there went to work with Adobe, and we're working on the font division in there. So I'm in this photograph somewhere. For the life of me, I don't have a high resolution of picture to be able to pick it out. It's somewhere in this orange yellow somewhere, right? Who else is in there? A gentleman named Rick Smolin. Rick is the publisher of the Day in the Life series, and then after this in 1990, a couple of years later, Rick shows up at Rebo Studio, this high definition television production company, where we're producing a version of his book From Alice to Ocean in high definition television in HDTV at the time. And so there's this connection from Rick Smolin and the Day in the Life series. Now later, when I was working for the first interactive ad rep firm, or one of the first interactive ad rep firms, 96, 97 in New York City, we did a Day in the Life of Christmas with Rick's blessing. So there's this connection, right? Another person that you can't see, two more people you can't see in this photo are Jane Metcalf and Louis Rossetto. For people who are really tied into this world, Jane and Louis are the co-founders of Wired magazine. So I met Jane and Louis in 1990. I re-met them again mid-1990s. Actually, it had to be, mid-1990s, when they came to Rebo, the HD studio, and they were looking to produce a version of Wired magazine in HD. And then I also arranged for Jane to be on the speaker panel of one of the conferences of Melia, which is this interactive multimedia market that I was working on with Media. So there's this really weird, connection. So I meet Jane and Louis here. We connect later around this, both this Melia conference and about Wired magazine. And if anybody can find volume 1, number 1 of Wired magazine and look at the back cover, that advertisement is for a business that I co-founded with a colleague of mine. And I bartered the back cover of V1N1 of Wired for HD production services. And then in another small world coincidence, Jane and Louis showed up in my life again in 2007, because they were among the first investors in TCHO chocolate. So I had met them at TED. We had an opportunity to discuss doing HD when I was at Rebo. I got Jane involved in the conference program when I was working for Amelia. And then out of the high-tech world, after they sold off their interest in Wired, they became an investor in Chocolate, the first outside investors. Right. And so there's all this connection here. Right. And that's so Jen, if you're still in the chat here, and you're watching, right? I know this is fortunate, right? But is it unusual is the question. I have had the great good fortune, not the great good fortune, but maybe some sort of self-awareness to just keep track of these things and to understand what it is that's going on. But who else? Who else is at TED too? Right. So we know that Mark Cantor is there. We know that Rick Smolin is there. We know that Jane and Louis Rossetto is there. Colleague of mine, Jeff Barkos, an employee with Apple Computer, is there. I ended up working through Jeff to do some consulting assignments for Silicon Graphics, which were associated with Time Warner New Media, and one of their first interactive video delivery system, the Time Warner network in Florida. So I solidify that connection there, right? And then Bryan Ferrin, who people may not know, but he's known for special effects in movies and Broadway. So I know the name of Bryan Ferrin because of my work in computer graphics. So among other things, I went to the SIGGRAPH, which is the special interest group for graphics of ACM, the Association of Computing Machinery. Remember, my father was reading communications to the ACM back in 1972, which is why we moved to New Zealand. We saw the job. So there's the connection there, right? And so SIGGRAPH, and I went to every SIGGRAPH between 1984 and 1998, so 15 years of SIGGRAPH. And who did I can't tell you the number of people that I met there, but people who are associated with the founding of Pixar, people who are associated with the founding of Symbolics, people, I don't know that I ever met Bryan Ferrin, but certainly I was aware of who he was because of his special effects on movies like Star Trek IV, The Final Frontier. And oh my gosh, so here we are. And who else was there? Jaron Lanier. I mean, if people don't know the name of Jaron Lanier, he was one of the earliest proponents of virtual reality, right? And so I know Jaron from being at TED 2 and from his participation in SIGGRAPHs over the course of a decade or more, right? I've never met Takanobu Igarashi, familiar with his work because of my connection at RISD. Who else is there in this? People from Disney, right? I'm not certain that I know any of these people who are part of this part of it from the Disney team, but I believe we're going to get to Frank Gehry. So certainly Frank Gehry is a name that I know from being a student at Rhode Island School of Design. I would have known him. I don't know that I photographed any Gehry work when I was working for either Ezra or Wolfgang, but there's this connection that I can make to my background. But who else is there? I mean, they're having AV troubles, blah, 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 right? And then, oh my gosh, I had forgotten that Ted Nelson was there. So I met Ted in 1988, 89, working for Interconsult in Cambridge. And then he shows up at TED 2, talking about hypertext, hypermedia, this project he's working on called Xanadu or Udenax, depending upon what you want to do. But I reconnected with Ted while he was there. And then, Nick Negroponte. So Media Lab connection. By this time, Nick had taken over the Media Lab. So this was after I visited in 1983, before 1987. But I knew who Nick was aware of his importance and what it is that he's doing at the Media Lab. And oh my gosh, Herbie Hancock is the musical guest, right? And Herbie Hancock is the musical guest. I don't remember meeting him. I may have said, hey, at some point, right? I went up to him, again, vague memory. This is in 1990, so it's a long time ago, um, saying that I had been backstage at his concert with Chicoria in Portland, Oregon. But there's another connection here. Harry Marks is not a name that most people will know, but I know Harry from my work at SIGGRAPH, at NEB, the National Association of Broadcasters. Um, and he was a just this legendary designer of broadcast graphics, particularly in the sports industry. And I was stayed friends with Harry for a number of years after this. He was in LA. When I was in LA for a year, I went and visited with him. Right? And so, oh my gosh, right? Here I am. Here I am. So this was in 1990. We're now in 2025. So 35 years later. Oh my gosh. And I'm thinking about all of these people, and some of them are connected. They provide the bridge, right, between my life in computer graphics and my life in chocolate today, right? But it is this forward-looking aspect of everything that I had been doing. So when I went from working at Artronics, 4 years looking at the future of computer technology in one of the most dynamic change, we went from computer graphics being done on mainframe computers to computer graphics being done on personal computer class hardware. We went from technologies that cost millions of dollars to technologies that cost tens of thousands of dollars. I was on the team that introduced the first 24-bit paint system to market at SIGGRAPH in the summer of 1984. I was on the team that introduced the first business graphics, so predecessor to PowerPoint, system for slide generation that had fully scalable outline fonts and editable kerning tables, right? And that was me in 1985 and 1986. When I went to work for Interconsult in 1987, 88, the project I was working on was called the Electronic Studio Project. Right? And we were looking at the future of networked computer graphics workstations and the future of graphics production for print and electronic reproduction, moving away from incredibly expensive proprietary systems like Cytex to personal computer-based solutions from a lot of people. And I can go and find a copy of that report. I have one, and look and say, where's Agfa going to be? Where's Adobe going to be? Who are the players going to be? What it is that you're doing? I have a drawing of what the electronic studio of the future is going to look like. And I'm going, oh my gosh, it's 1989. And I've sort of predicted the network connection that we see today in electronic studios. This is not this. All of this is going about and saying that I lived during interesting times, but I had an awareness that I was living during interesting times and I was meeting interesting people and that I was making these connections, and that now at 30 some odd years removed, what I can do is make those connections, right? And it is all that work that I did in that decade from 1983 to 1994, right, which is when I got introduced to single origin chocolate for the first time. It is that forward-looking, meeting all these people, seeing futures that maybe other people didn't exist, thinking about the future, right, coupled with the modeling that had been done by my father and by my parents. I need to um, give them both an enormous amount of credit for that, which says that it's okay, right, to say, I have found something that's new and interesting and different. And even though I had a quote unquote different career path and invested a lot of time and a lot of money, you can see an opportunity that's going to interest you. It takes advantage of what you're good at, right? It has value to the world, right? You can make some money doing it. But most importantly, and I want to end with this, is that of all the things that I talk about in this episode, of all the things that I've done, the thing that I am perhaps most proud of, right, is that I know that people have been inspired by the work that I have done in chocolate to find and follow their own chocolate life. I know that there are many people who have read my book, Discover Chocolate, who've used it as a source of inspiration. I have talked at, innumerable conferences, right? Innumerable in the sense that I haven't thought about counting them, right? Conferences. I've contributed to who knows how many articles or stories about chocolate. I know that there are people who have looked at the work that I have done, who have looked at the example that I have set, right, and said, I can go do that, right? And that is what drives me among most other things, the idea to inspire others to find and follow their own chocolate life, right? That gives me the greatest amount of satisfaction today. And I am hoping that one of the things that you who are watching this might be inspired to do is to go and take a look, right? Take an inventory of your background, take an inventory of your history and go, oh my gosh, I was here and I met some interesting people, and I can make this connection from something that I was doing when I was 12 to something that I'm doing here when I'm in my mid 60s. Or this is what it is that's interesting. You don't need to really worry about writing an autobiography or think about writing an autobiography, but there is value in this reflection to be able to really hone in. It's not a matter of inventing or reinventing yourself. It's about discovering and rediscovering yourself. Can you go and find the passion? What was it, right? What is it, more importantly, that inspires me to do what it is that I'm doing today? Where did it come from? And if for some reason things are becoming less interesting, or you're finding less value or less interest in your life, rediscovering the passion and maybe finding new outlets for it, right, is really, really important to, I think, the notion of happiness and understanding where it is, what it is that you're doing in the world. And that's what I want to leave everybody who's watched this to this point with, that thought. Not, here's Clay guy, he's bragging about all the people that he's met in the world. Believe me, I've met a bunch more people during the course of this, and I can make the connections. And my point here is not to say I've met a lot of interesting people. My hope is that you've met a lot of interesting people too, and you just haven't taken the time to remember them and to find out why is it, or if there is a connection between meeting them and anything else that I'm doing in my life. What are the lessons that I have learned from meeting these people? What can I talk about them? It's been a really valuable experience to me, as it's helped center what it is that's going on. And I hope that what you'll do is you'll find that it's valuable to you as well. One final comment from Jin. Thanks for the in-depth background, a good mix of opportunity, luck, and taking risks. So what I want to do, Jin, is really, really go talk about that combination. So many people that says luck, right, is part of what is luck is being in a position to take advantage of opportunities that come your way, right? And that risk taking for me wasn't a risk. I have to admit that among the other things I'm fortunate of is that I had work and family circumstances that enabled me to go and say, I don't need to worry about making a ton of money in the next 3 months, or I don't need to worry about being the primary breadwinner for the next 2 years. I've been incredibly fortunate in those respects as well. But I'm most fortunate when it comes to, for example, computer graphics. 1983, I'm seeing this opportunity to join a high-tech startup, to recognize the opportunity, not to take a risk, but to say, oh my gosh, this is new and interesting, and I see an opportunity that will take me someplace else. In 1994, oh my gosh, right? I see an opportunity, it will take me someplace else. What do I need to learn? How can I take my skills? How can I take what it is that I know and put my own unique stamp on it, make it mine in a new and interesting kind of way? And that's what I've been able to do. But at no point doing this have I really thought that I was taking a risk in doing anything. It was merely recognizing an opportunity, right? Fortunately, having the circumstances to take advantage of that opportunity, right? And to go forward in doing it. And I'm lucky that, I put out my shingle on the internet as a professional chocolate critic, I think the first in the world. independent professional chocolate critic in June of 2001, and I've been doing it now for, what does this mean, 24 years? And it's been a great privilege, right, to be afforded the opportunity through the support of members of the Chocolate Life, which is a good segue to say this episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. And if I were a better host and paying more attention. So this is the post for today's episode. Here's the homepage of the Chocolate Life. You can click on the join button here, and there's always a free membership tier, but there is also premium tiers starting as little as $5 a month. And at the upper levels of the premium tiers, the upper level of the premium tiers, when you get to the annual membership tiers, annual membership payments, they come with consulting fees. Or coaching hours, not consulting fees. They come with coaching hours. So you can support the work of the Chocolate Life, pay for all the infrastructure, all the time it takes for me to do this, and I can continue to deliver the kind of content that you've been enjoying here. And if you go back over to the Chocolate Life, one of the things I did this morning is I updated the archive page for episodes of Pod Safe Chocolate. And this is episode 158. And every single episode down to episode 101 is on this page. So you can go figure that out for yourself, right? You can go and search and do that. Every single one of these is up, hosted on YouTube, and you can do that. If you're interested in knowing previous episodes, so here are episodes 1 to 100, right? It's the same image, but from November 17th, 2023, the first ever episode of Pod Save Chocolate. And then you can also go click here to the archives and look at the archive of the Chocolate Life Live, which goes through 146 episodes, 146, 158, so 304 episodes of these kind of video podcasts. It's all there. It's all there for you for free to go and have a chance to interact with. And with that, I want to say thanks, everybody, for being here today. This coming Friday, which is Halloween, the 31st of October, I will have the topic of the episode of Pod Safe Chocolate will be Halloween. We're going to be looking at the history of Halloween, the history of gifting. What did it start out being? Right? When did we start gifting candy? And then what are some of the issues that people are paying attention to today when it comes to gifting chocolate candy for Halloween? And I'm mentioning this to myself, so I update the episode to say I'll also be talking about what my secret chocolate obsessions are and were and are. All right, and how that manifests itself around Halloween. At that, I want to say thanks everybody for being here today, and to remind you that if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Till the next time, everyone.